It seems like this country is more divided than ever.
And then he slammed on the gas right into people.
As racist rhetoric comes out of the shadows.
Our country has been usurped by a foreign tribe called the Jews.
But as one of the most diverse cities in the country, how can Houston lead the way to a brighter future?
Houston's one of the biggest mosaics of racial diversity in the country.
So I think Houston's going to set an example for the rest of the country and let them know that this is how we do it.
Standing together, we are tackling race relations in Houston. Thank you for joining us tonight for what is sure to be a difficult but necessary conversation about race. Hello, I'm Len Cannon.
And I'm Mia Gradney. We want to welcome everyone watching, not just on air, but also our live stream on the KHOU Facebook page, app, web page, and YouTube. Yeah, we have a prominent group for you tonight to help in our discussion, including city leaders, community activists, and law enforcement. And we have an audience here with us to help weigh in. Yeah, Rika Mudaraj is also out in our newsroom. She will be talking with what we call the next generation, young folks listening in. So join the conversation. We want you to use the hashtag #StandsForHouston. And now for what people in Houston are saying about those startling images we saw in Virginia.
It's really scary, actually, like living in this country and seeing how bad it is right now. It's really scary. Feels like there's been a lot of tension for a while now.
Something like that was bound to happen. It's not shocking. There's always been hatred.
I think it's a small group that needs to be singled out. What's going on with these people? Why are they still hating like this, you know?
We've kind of increased the, I guess, the temperature of the country racially to a point where we're at a boiling point.
All right, so let's get started. First, the question, how did we get here? Here we are in 2017 with people carrying torches, waving Nazi flags, chanting, "Jews will not replace us." To help us understand it more is Bishop James Dixon with the Community of Faith Church, Professor Stephen Kleinberg right here with the Kinder Institute for Urban Research at Rice University, and far to the left, Dr. Matthew Clavin, an expert on history of race and slavery in America at the University of Houston. Professor Kleinberg, I'll start with you. We've heard whites say they feel disenfranchised in the last few years. What does that mean? Why do they feel that way?
Well, we are in the midst of a fundamental transformation, right? An epic transition from a nation that was an amalgam of European nationalities into becoming a microcosm of the world. This is the first nation in the history of the world that can say, we are a free people and we come from everywhere. And it's a remarkable change, but not surprising that people are seeing these changes and saying, wait a minute, no one consulted with me before.
So what is it about the changes that makes some people feel like they're being left out?
That's exactly right. I mean, it's this combination of both a new economy that requires much more education than ever before and this demographic shift. And so it's not surprising that a change of this magnitude in this new world creates some degree of conflict and concern. And you can see it across the board. You can see it in Houston. Older Anglos have much more difficulty with these changes than younger Anglos who tend to take this for granted. So it's a part of living at a time of remarkable change.
And so is it part of it, Professor, some fear because suddenly there is more diversity. There are more people who don't look like me than ever before.
Exactly. We are, and this sense that others are making it and I'm not. And the group in America that is suffering the most, that the one demographic in this country whose life expectancy has gone down, who are dying from what economists call the diseases of despair, are white men with high school educations or less, age 50 and older, in rural areas. And that's a big part of what's
So one of the big controversies we've been talking about is the issue of these Confederate monuments. Professor Clavin, there are people who say, look, you get rid of Confederate statues, you get rid of my heritage. Is that a legitimate argument?
I would say no, and I've said this before. You can take down a statue and you can move it to a museum, you can move it to a community center, you can move it to someone's private property. But these monuments are really memorials to white supremacy and racial hatred. And I would add to what Professor Kleinberg said that although it's very rarely discussed, there's always been, it had been a minority movement of people fighting for a colorblind society. And in the 19th century, before the Civil War, they were abolitionists. They were black, they were white, they were rich, they were poor, they were in a minority, but they dreamed of an America like we have in the 21st century, with an African-American president, you know, African-Americans making money, large groups of immigrants from other countries, in many places not being discriminated against. And that dream has become very much a reality in places like Houston, Texas, in California. And for some people, this is a threat to their way of life. And those memorials oftentimes are a way to hearken back to the quote-unquote good old days when there wasn't a colorblind society, when European Americans had a distinct advantage in the workplace, at school, on the public streets. And oftentimes those monuments are exploited, they're appropriated to serve, you know, modern-day political agendas.
Okay, so Bishop Dixon, our president, he tweeted, "You can't change history, but you can certainly learn from it." He said, you take down the monuments, you destroy culture and history. And what do you say to that?
Well, I think that that is certainly an inept statement, and it reveals a level of insensitivity, if not something deeper. But I would suggest that what we're dealing with here is a fear of a loss of dominance and the ability to control outcomes.
But you know, some people would say, look, they would say, Bishop, you know, my ancestors fought, whether you like the reason or not, in the Confederate, for the Confederates in the Civil War. And so why should we not honor them or not in some way? That's going to be the argument.
Let's remember that these individuals that they're speaking of fought to maintain the most inhumane version of human enslavement ever known in the world. And if we're going to be a country that respects the relevance and the value of all people, remember those individuals fought to make sure my ancestors continued working on plantations for free. Those individuals fought to maintain a system that raped our women, produced children out of wedlock, and dispersed our men across the land, took away our culture.
Okay,
so the conversation has to be bigger than what this meant to you because your ancestors fought in a war. Remember, that war was about whether we're going to continue an America that enslaves human beings and demeans them and treats them like they're less than a man. That's what this is about.
The president's chief strategist, Steve Bannon, calls the whole statue argument, quote, race, identity, politics from the left.
Well, I would suggest that...
It's just politics.
Well, that is certainly, again, a very inept statement, and I would call it something different in other places. But I think that we need to understand that we're dealing with individuals who are seeking not equality, but dominance, superiority. When we deal with white supremacy, when we deal with the white nationalists, these are individuals who have a view of America that suggests that they should maintain control that they've had, and they had that control when there was a system that enslaved people who are of a darker hue.
Okay, so we're talking about how we got here. So, gentlemen, thank you for that. But I'm sure the audience has thoughts about the current state of race relations in this country. Mia, what are people saying to you?
You know they have input here, Len. I'm joined by Dr. Wood, who happens to be from Charlottesville. He marched with Dr. King. I want to hear from you. You have some thoughts as to how did we get here?
Yes. First of all, Martin Luther King gave his life to eliminate the root causes of poverty in America. We must not forget that a lot of the people who voted for Trump voted for Obama. So we've got to be a little more clinical than we are here. Racism, in my judgment, is a proxy war against the poor, all the poor. And we have to be so clinical that we can solve this thing. America has the resources to do this. And we just need a new paradigm. We need a new playbook. That's what King died for. In 8 months, it'll be fully 50 years since he left us. He said, if I have to die, I want to die among poor people. I want to die for poor people. We've had presidents, almost no one since Lyndon Johnson has been willing to champion the cause of the poor. If you're going to fix society, you cannot fix it from the middle class up. You've got to fix it for the people who are furthest down. If you don't do that, you'll further bifurcate the society. Someone has done a wonderful job on helping us understand dream hoarders. There's a percentile of the population, the upper middle class, who have shaped the public policy so that it concentrates wealth up and the poverty deepens down below. We can fix that. And Houston is a great city for that, I think, because of its diversity, its resources, and especially its people resources. And I'm just excited. Been here 12 years, retired here. I thought I was retiring, but I guess I wasn't retired.
And here you are.
I was refired.
Here you are. But how can you remain silent at this time? I'm sure you feel moved to speak again, to act again.
Well, it's more, I think that we help the forces of reaction when we run out and do the counter marches. We make an event of something that would simply die and go away. Mary McLeod Bethune, the great Mary McLeod Bethune, when she established her college down in Daytona Beach, she knew the Klan was going to march on them, right? So she got the whole town to turn all the lights out, right? The Klan marches up into the middle of Daytona Beach, and as soon as the Klan is in the middle of the community, she has everybody just flip the lights on. And there they are, exposed, and they run. I think we've got to be much smarter than we are, and especially our people on the bottom need us to do that. And I'm so happy to be in the state of Lyndon Johnson, the last president who would talk openly and passionately about eliminating poverty and the root causes of poverty.
Eliminating poverty for all. Thank you so much,
Yes.
Dr. Wood, for your commentary. Len, back to you.
Much for the input. I know we hear some of this information and we sort of think this is all ancient history. However, I think a lot of us were stunned to see so many young people carrying those torches in Charlottesville last weekend. Rekha Mudaraj is in our newsroom. She's talking with some young adults. And what do they have to say, Rekha?
Well, Len, I'm with a dynamic group of young adults, millennials, who have very strong opinions about all of this. They all were talking a lot about how social media has played a role in these rallies, in these protests, and garnering support for both sides. Right now, I'm joined by Stephen Orozco. So you had an opinion about social media. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, when it comes to social media, we have to understand that's the revolutionary tool of this generation, where we get to communicate like instantaneously, so we can start our own businesses. But what happens, a lot of people start their own hate groups, and if they go unchecked, if they don't check white supremacy the way they check so-called Islamic terrorism, then you're going to have it spread like it is right now today.
Absolutely. And another thing that you heard them talking about in their panel just now is talking about how a lot of the white nationalists who were marching, who were out there with those torches, were young adults. They were your age, and they were out there doing the same thing. Does anyone have a specific, very strong feeling about seeing people so young doing that? Go ahead.
This kind of racism, this kind of bigotry in the youth stems absolutely from the lack of education, which leads to a lack of opportunity. The United States economy is changing, the world is changing, and we have failed these people at some level that we did not afford them the education that would allow them to flourish in the 21st century, in the internet age. And now they're using the internet for such vile, violent, poisonous movements. And we have to change that, and we have to start with education.
Pranav Joshi, thank you so much for that. Of course, Len, we're going to send it back to you. You'll be hearing from us throughout this rally. Go ahead.
All right. As they say goes, Bishop, out of the mouth of babes. They're relative babes related to us. We are just getting started tonight.
None of us are in the young group, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know. We're just getting started tonight when it comes to race relations. I often hear people say slavery long gone, racism thing of the past. It doesn't happen anymore. Coming up, we're talking about some of the everyday racism that people face. Welcome back to our discussion about race relations in Houston. People have said to me over the years, racism. What racism? We had a black president, for crying out loud. But you know what? We've learned if you aren't the target, then sometimes you can be oblivious. Slavery may be gone. The attitudes in some folks still persist. So now we're going to be talking about everyday racism that folks are experiencing today. We're joined by Diane Gross, with the Regional Director of the Anti-Defamation League, along with Mary Ramos, President of the League of United Latin American Citizens, otherwise known as LULAC, and of course Bishop Dixon is back again. Diane, let's start with you. I know that many synagogues in the Houston area in the past year have gotten hate mail. Where's it coming from? What does it say?
Well, the ADL has monitored a number of incidents where synagogues have been the recipient of vandalism in the Houston area. Just recently, 2 synagogues were vandalized. And we've traced these incidents back to Vanguard America, which is a well-known racist group throughout this country. They have about 200 members in 20 states and a small contingent of racists that are in the Houston area.
All right, so you're seeing it. Mary, for you, immigration has become a flashpoint. Are you seeing, because it's become such a heated discussion, are you seeing incidents where people are being harassed in the community, where they're targeted in the community?
Very much so.
How so?
Very much so. A lot of the children in schools, I've been to a couple of elementary schools because I have principals calling the LULAC office that these children are so scared to death to go to school because they're afraid that their parents will be picked up and taken away. And that is no way to live. There's so much racism in this nation, and people say it's not there any longer, and that's not true. You know, immigration is a part of racism too. You know, these people come here for a better life, and they always say, you know, we're all human beings. We're all human beings, and all of us, if they come here for a good life, if they commit a crime, take them away. I understand that. But, you know, if they're here just to get a better life, get their children educated, and you see a lot of our dreamers that are out there. Dreamers are so important to this nation.
All right, so those are the incidents that you're familiar with. Bishop Dixon, I want to ask you, you're well respected, you're well known in this community. You ever walk into a store and feel like you're a suspect?
I walk in a store's buildings. Look, being a black man in a suit and a tie does not exempt you from being treated like you're a suspect.
But does it still happen now?
It happens now. I've been pulled over in my nice SUV with a suit and tie, driving the speed limit, surrounded my car with police officers ready to draw guns, and until they found out who I am. That has happened, and I want to say that was not HPD, that was in the county outside. So my point is, but the point is, it does happen every day. If you would ask every black man in this room, have you ever been treated like a suspect unnecessarily, I promise you they have stories. We have stories because there continues to be this trend. No, racism does not exist anymore. Let me use a very common vernacular for us. You know, don't urinate on my head and tell me it's raining. We live this experience. Our children live this experience. And to say that it doesn't exist is to call us either we are simply overdramatic or we're simply trying to play the victim card. That's not the reality.
I can point to my own personal experience. I remember in another city calling about an apartment. How many apartments are available? Oh, fine, sir, we've got several. I get there, and all of a sudden, no apartments are available. I'm a little perplexed, and then the light goes on. Oh, you didn't know that I was black.
And the truth of the matter is, African Americans still pay more in interest than anyone else. We're turned down more for loans when our credit is the same as others still today.
Absolutely.
We're turned down for mortgages at a higher rate than anyone else when the credit is better or equal. So that still exists in our nation. We've got to fix that. And as long as we're in denial, then denial causes a greater sense of despair, anger, and hopelessness. And that's what causes young people to often respond the way they respond because we're not being listened to or believed or taken seriously.
Okay, folks in the audience perhaps have their own experiences. Mia?
You know they do, whether they're Black, Hispanic, or Muslim. I'm joined now by Dalia Kusum. She may appear familiar because she ran for Pearland City Council. She's from Pearland, a pharmacist there. Talk to us about everyday racism for you.
Sure. And so, you know, we're talking about, is there racism? And there definitely is. And people who do not experience the racism always put us as victims. You know, they're trying to play the victim card. They're trying to use this against you. But the truth is that each and every one of us that are from minority groups have experienced it. We know that it exists. And what we need to ask is, how do we make it go away? There is a pyramid of hate that starts off with just dialogue, hateful dialogue that we have been hearing constantly in our national news. Hateful rhetoric that has caused these people who have these extreme views to come out and to cause harm and to murder people. And so what we need to think about right now is, how do we get past this racism that does exist? It's not a question anymore. It's there. And we need to pursue it by providing love. One of your colleagues once wrote, pyramid of love. And as long as we provide that love and we experience it throughout our communities, and we talk to one another about how we can approach these people that just hate everyone. They will hate their own self because they don't think that that person's white. So it's not a matter of just, you know, hating all minorities. These people hate ideas that don't coincide with their own. And so how do we go past that? And to do that, we have to show love. We have to talk to them. We have to explain to them our part and become more responsive to how they're feeling, because they are having true feelings. You know, something personal that happened to me while I was running, of course, you know, hate through website and Facebook and stuff is normal, but a flyer sent out that had a picture of me and an African-American man that on the bottom said, "A chance for redemption." And what does that mean? That's the kind of things that we need to come out and talk against, so that we can continue to spread the love and the understanding of our cultures and grow as a community. And that's what Houston provides. Houston is a city of diversity. I've knocked on doors and I've gotten the best responses ever from every kind of person. And so we cannot talk about hatred in a sense that, you know, this group and that group. It is a very small group that we need to talk to inform, and to educate. And like we said, hatred comes with lack of knowledge, lack of education. And if our government continues to decide to not support our schools, our healthcare, and our well-being so that people can succeed in the U.S., then we will continue to have these disparities.
Dalia, thank you. I think she said something so important. You know, she talked about inform and educate, and that's what it's about. And in doing so, it's having these conversations that aren't always easy, and that not everyone always wants to join, but we're carrying it out here tonight, Lynn.
Yeah, difficult conversations, but necessary. Now, you would think for the generation that Reka is talking to in our newsroom tonight, everyday racism, that's non-existent. So I wonder what you're hearing from these young people. Reka?
Sadly, I'm hearing very similar stories. Michael Orion has some experiences that he's gone through. Michael, thanks for talking to us. You told me that when you were living in Montana, you experienced racism at a very different level. Tell me about it.
Being in Montana, we live in Polson, Montana, me and my family. We were the only Black family there. And growing up, I realized that it started very young. I wasn't even aware of it at first. But we would get hate mail. We would get different times we go to restaurants. They tell us if we're not out by dark, we wouldn't get home safely. We moved to Washington State shortly after that. And even in Washington, they would cut off goats' heads and put it on our porch and put markings on our doors, and cutting off deer's legs and putting in our front yards as fear tactics. And I would go to attend school, and then I'd find out that these things were happening by my peers' parents. And so it was indoctrinated, it was educated through the children, and they would actually express this to myself and my sisters.
And experiencing this at such a young age, how has that affected you growing up?
Well, I knew that I had to carry myself differently. I couldn't react. I would have to address things in a certain manner.
Going about it was more so suppressing my anger and more so being able to display that I could take the pain, I could take the fear. I'm not scared. And this way I could say, I'm going to be here in class today, and that's how I would approach it every single day.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing that story. I'm sorry those things have happened to you, but hopefully this conversation can help promote some change. Thank you. Len, back to you.
All right, Rika, thank you very much. It's a very sad thing when supposedly responsible adults are teaching another generation about the hate that they have learned. We're trying to stop a cycle of that. You know, we proudly talk about Houston being one of the most diverse cities in the country. Coming up, what lessons this city has learned about race relations that other cities can learn from. Right back.
It's a lot more diverse here, so I feel like we're a lot more welcoming to different people.
In Houston, how it's a lot of diversity and everybody seems like they get along and everybody accepts everybody. And
the diversity really plays a big role in how we treat each other.
People come from different countries here, and I guess somehow we managed to get along.
I think it's a little bit different than most of the parts of the country because we have a lot of diversity.
Every single day I run into a Muslim, a Christian, a Hindu, Indians, black folks, white folks, every race, every day. And so you don't get to put it in a box.
That is so very true. I don't know how many of you go to Costco, but I have to say, whenever I go, no, I'm serious, I feel like I'm at the United Nations. I see people from everywhere, and I moved here from New York City, and I was stunned. I didn't know Houston was so international as well as diverse among folks here. So it's projected, in fact, that the rest of the country will look like Houston in terms of diversity by the year 2050. So what lessons can we share with America about living side by side? Once again, we have Dr. Stephen Kleinberg, Bishop Dixon is here, and rapper, sometime journalist, guest lecturer at Rice U. You didn't know that, did you? Bun B. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Dr. Kleinberg, specifically, what makes Houston so diverse?
So the big story in Houston is, of course, during the oil boom years, it was Anglos from everywhere else in the country pouring into Houston during the 60s and 70s until 1982. When the oil boom collapsed, the Anglo population stopped growing, And all the growth of this, the most rapidly growing city in America, has been the influx of African Americans, Latinos, and Asians, and we've become the single most ethnically diverse city in the country. And it's taken us 30 years of this experience. But in that process, a sense of this is who we are. And you can see that sort of increasing acceptance, and we're falling in love with each other and getting married, making multiracial babies. And we sociologists don't like that. We want to put people into separate categories. And
you're messing up my box here.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But also the other big point, I think, is that the growth of the Latino and Asian populations are now no longer new immigrants. They are the 100% American kids who are the children of the immigrants of 25 and 30 years ago. So it's a sense of, whoa, no one necessarily would have chosen this. This is what we are. This is what Houston is. And the other key point I think to make is that younger Anglos take for granted what we older older Anglos are still struggling to accept. And it's a part of, we older Anglos grew up in the 60s and 70s. That was a different world than the 90s and 2000s. What we experience and feel comfortable with is that growing up in the world that we experience and is the world that we feel most comfortable with.
So we heard in the last segment, everybody, that Houston is by far far from perfect.
Right.
Okay, even though it is very diverse and we can teach lessons. But Bishop, have you found that with more diversity, folks living next to each other, socializing more, do people get along more?
Exposure influences expectations. And I think it's very important that we expose each other to one another's culture. That happens in Houston a lot. It's happening in schools a lot. I mean, over 100 languages are spoken in HISD alone. So that exposes us. But I think it's very important, too, that education from the parental level. My greatest pain in what I watched the news last week was to see a little hooded girl being taught by her parents that this is how you see another human being. If we can reverse that and begin to teach the value that all of us are God's children, we're all from Him, we got one Father, we got one family with one future, and we are a blended family. We are a huge blended family. If we can expose people to that truth and that reality, we can change the dynamics of the conversation.
You talk about being exposed. Bun B, during the campaign of the presidency, you went on the campaign trail.
Yes.
You interviewed white nationalists. What did they say to you?
Well, I mean, it was interesting because a lot of times their arguments fell flat, right? They talked about wanting to go back to the days of the forefathers, and I tried to explain to a lot of them as, people who live in a certain class in this country, if you didn't own land, you didn't have money, if we went back to 1776, you wouldn't have any more of a voice than I would. So I think people have a very skewed view of what this country actually was in the times that they didn't live through it. Some people think it was better than it was, and some people don't realize how drastic some of these situations were. So when they talk about going back to a certain time, for me, it doesn't tell me anything good. This country has gotten better as it's gotten older, So if we go back to the younger years of any one of us, right, we wouldn't be happy about a lot of things that we've done when we were young, and I think America isn't happy about a lot of things that it's done in its earlier years.
Did you feel in the conversations with these folks that was ever any tension, or were they comfortable talking to you?
Oh, no, they were very comfortable talking to me because they had nothing to hide. They were very confident in their views. There was a level of conviction in the way they saw the world that we don't normally see. And, this was, almost a year ago when I was out on the campaign trail. And even through the earliest days of his campaigning, he had been using such divisive rhetoric that people already were emboldened to express views that were beyond just being politically correct. They simply were immoral and just unnecessary for a progressive country like America.
All right, Bun B, thank you. We've got Mayor Sylvester Turner. He's joining us live right now. Mayor, thank you for being there. Born and raised in Acres Homes. I know you're proud of that. Tell us about, when it comes to race in Houston, why do you think Houston does so much better in race relations than perhaps other cities?
Well, look, Houston has changed quite a bit over the last 25 years. As the people on the panel have already said, we are so highly diverse. But if we just stop at talking about diversity, I think we will have missed the mark. You can be diverse, separate, segregated, and apart. The question is, can we be diverse and at the same time be inclusive? And we've been working very hard in being inclusive. And what I mean by that, when it comes to who's sitting around at the table of decision making, are those personalities, are those voices diverse? And we work to do that, whether, for example, at the City of Houston, whether it's the department heads, you see the diversity. People sitting around the executive table with me at City Hall is highly diverse. The people around on City Council, the City Council members, highly diverse. People coming, they're there from different religions, they speak different languages, they come from different communities all over the city. So you can be diverse, and if you stop, you miss. But when you are inclusive and people feel as though that they are respected, they are appreciated, that their voices are being heard, that they are being seen, that you're responding to the conditions in their neighborhoods, then a lot of the problems that we see occurring across the country, we won't necessarily experience here. And so that's the beauty. We are truly a pluralistic society in the city of Houston. There is no ethnic majority in the city of Houston. And I think we have learned over the years that we function much better when people are brought to the table and when we are respectful of one another's ideas. And let me just say this, it's not about just being diverse in terms of language or ethnicity or religion. We are diverse in terms of ideas. So people can have different ideas, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go at each other. And we have to work and strive to do better each and every day.
Mayor Sylvester Turner, thank you. I'm still waiting on you to start that church, sir. I'm sorry, Bishop.
Hey, Lynn.
Yes.
Hey, Lynn, can I say one other thing? Let me just say this. Many of the problems that we are facing at City Hall, for example, are not problems that were created right here in the city of Houston. Many of our issues that we're dealing with right now, the hot button items, we are responding to the national winds that have flowed down into our city. I only hope that as we move forward, that we don't allow others, their thoughts, their views, their actions, to permeate our existence in this city. I think we can be the model for other cities and even the model for this country on how we move forward. I don't want things that have happened in our past, relics and other things that have happened in our past, that dark, ugly history of our past, for us to bring them forward and then breathe life into those things, and those things that represented our ugly past now are still alive and are pulling us apart. I think we have to work very hard to resist that. And I want people to take a look at the city of Houston. Look around in almost any neighborhood. I mean, look around and see what is happening here. I think we are not perfect. We are not perfect. But I think we are learning to do a much better job of being respectful of one another, being inclusive of one another, and recognize that we are greater when we respect every neighborhood, when we recognize every person has value, and we recognize that every person is entitled to his or her opinion.
Mayor Turner, thank you. Mia's got an audience member.
You know what? Houstonians take a great pride in what we are getting right here in Houston. So many people have comments on this one, including Joshua Mohammed. Tell us what you think.
Being born and raised in Houston, Houston is a picture, like we said, of what America is will be in 2050. And symbolically, it's a great city. Substantially, we have a lot of things we need to deal with. And as Trump is peeling back the white civility and the race relations in our country, Houston is in a prime position to be the example for the rest of the nation. We have to do so more than symbolically, but substantially. So we could talk about how we're more diverse, everybody can have a seat at the table, but even under that, when it comes to economic conditions, you still have things like gentrification in Third Ward. You have the prison system is, we 13% of the nation, or 13% of Houston as black people, but we're like 50% of the prison population. So Houston is a prime example to deal with those issues in an equitable way. And if we do, we can set the example for the rest of the nation. If we don't, then we're in a prime position to be something even worse than Charlottesville if we don't deal with those situations in a substantial way.
All right, Joshua, thank you so much. We know we have our flaws. We know we have those things that we need to work on, that's for sure. Want to hear from another Houstonian now. Paul Geike joins me. Paul, what is it that Houston's getting right in your eyes?
I think Houston's getting right the fact that we're having the conversation. And for me, I'm overwhelmed by the reality that I need to listen. I need to listen and I need to learn from people. And I think we see that in Houston. I was talking with an African-American friend of mine a long time ago, and I was just honest with him. And I said, sometimes I'm hesitant because I don't want to unintentionally offend as I have conversations about race. And he told me something that stuck with me. He said, if you don't have the conversation, you implicitly become part of the problem. And then he reminded me of something that Jesus said. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. And then he went on to make a proactive sacrifice to make that peace. And what I realize is that if I don't talk about this, if Houston doesn't talk about this, we might be keeping peace, a false sense of peace, but we're not proactively going and making peace. So people like me, as a Caucasian man, I have not experienced systemic racism, but my African-American brothers and sisters, for example, have and still do. And I need to listen to them and learn what I can do to make a proactive sacrifice to be not a peacekeeper, but a peacemaker.
All right. Paul, thank you so much for those prophetic words. I told you Houstonians have a lot to say about what Houston is getting right. We could spend a whole day doing that, Len, but I'm going to send it back to you in the meantime.
Yeah, good to hear the input there, Mia. Thank you. Reka's been talking to the young folks in our newsroom. What are you hearing over there, Reka?
The young folks, you know, Len, this room is actually very much split in half. About half are native Houstonians and half are transplants, but they all stand for Houston. Am I right? Yes, that's what I thought. So, Alex, I want to ask you, what does our town, what does H-Town get right?
H-Town gets right everything. We are the leading city in all of Texas and the United States of America. And as a leader, we must set standards for not only for us, but to the United States. So whenever they see us and look at us nationally, we can say, wow, Houston, where has Houston been? I mean, we could set each other as a leader, and we are the leading here in Houston.
I like that. We are the most diverse city here. Lee Williams, now tell me a little bit about what Houston gets right when it comes to race relations.
Well, thank you, Reka, for this opportunity in KHOU. I want to say that as a native Houstonian, we have been poised to see the difference in terms of the transformation of our great city. We are the most diverse city in the nation. We speak lots of languages. We are creating forums such as this one to foster dialogue. And we have celebrations around food and culture all the time that create educational opportunities so people can learn about one another. So I think Houston does a lot of things right. As the young man and the mayor said before, we still have a long way to go, but our city is very diverse and I'm very proud of our city.
So Houston should be the example for other large cities in our country, you think? You think we set a good example?
I do, absolutely, but there's always work to be done. I think coming to the table for dialogue, having conversations like this one is very important, but also engaging people who are of different mindsets. A lot of the people who are represented here, we all feel similarly about the situation in Charlottesville, that it was abhorrent, but we also need to engage people who don't think like us as well.
Absolutely.
So,
Lee, thank you so much for weighing in. Len?
All right, Reka, thank you for the input. Stay with us. Join the conversation online using the hashtag #StandsForHouston as we continue to talk and look for solutions for the future. We want to hear your thoughts. We'll be right back.
good to me, Ashton.
All right, back to our discussion about race relations in Houston. Joining us now, we've got the brass. Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo, sitting next to him, Harris County Sheriff Ed Gonzales, and once again, Bishop Dixon. Thank you all. There's been a long history of tension and distrust, Chief, between the minority community and law enforcement. How do you deal with that in today's day and age? We've come from Ferguson to Trayvon to Baltimore to officers being gunned down. Let's talk about it all. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think you deal with it one contact at a time by treating people with respect and dignity and having a mindset that regardless of what you're there for, regardless of the person's socioeconomic standing, color of their skin, their ethnicity, whatever it is, that we treat everybody with the respect, and even the biggest criminal. You know, it doesn't mean that we dehumanize people. And so I think we're building trust in the city of Houston and in American policing, one contact at a time.
I hear what you're saying, but Sheriff, I want to get to you. I've heard officers say when they work in certain communities, it's a high crime area, they become jaded. They become to expect that people in those areas are going to behave a certain way, so they treat them a certain way. How do you adjust to that? What do you say to your deputies?
Well, I think one thing that we need to try to advocate for is to try to make sure that we have a more diverse workforce and make sure that the officers or deputies that work with us that don't only come and police a certain community and then drive out to the suburbs somewhere, but many times can come from those communities, understand diverse populations, and that's something that I think we need to continue to strive for. For me, growing up being a native Houstonian, one of my earliest memories was the tragic death of Joe Campos Torres that died, at the hands of the Houston Police Department, and that's something that I hope we never repeat here. And we have to learn. 8 months on the job, it's something still want to assess the culture of our agency and see how we can improve. It's always about doing better. And I'm proud of the work that we do day in and day out. It's a difficult job, but we need to make sure that we're always thinking ahead and developing stronger police relationships with the communities.
I know that you have watched all the different news stories over the past 2 or 3 years, both of you. And you sit back and police officers are painted a certain way, and sometimes justly. How do you change that?
Well, I think you have to, first of all, engage one another. I speak the truth. Sometimes the truth hurts one side or the other. The truth of the matter is that policing is not perfect. The human condition isn't perfect. We've got a man of faith right here. Christ died on the cross for a reason. So we have to be vigilant. We have to call them as we see them. And quite frankly, what breaks my heart is the problem in policing ain't the cops. We've got the best generation of police officers right now. It's people like us that are in leadership positions that are afraid to anger the unions in the police department sometimes, and they'll keep somebody they clearly shouldn't keep, or sometimes they'll sell out a police officer because the community's angry. We've got to not focus on keeping our job. We've got to focus on doing our jobs, and it's really about leadership in this country at all levels.
Bishop, you ever had folks in your congregation come to you, you mentioned it earlier, with complaints about harassment from police?
If we were to have a community forum on that, the line would be very, very long. But I think that we're making improvements with leadership like our chief and like the sheriff, who really understand it and they get it. Let's face it, we say slavery is over. Look at the prison population that could be argued. I think we have to understand that in this nation, we've got to continue to work at community policing. Community-oriented policing solves that problem. If the community does not know the people in that community, respect the people in that community, he cannot be a peace officer. Remember, it's a peace officer. That's what it says, right? I'm a peace officer. And you can't be a peace officer maintaining the peace if you don't know the people that you're keeping the peace for. That's very important. But I think also the dialogue is huge. And then recruitment is huge. Where are these officers coming from? What's their upbringing? Were they trained and raised by people who taught them to respect all human beings the same? Because if a child was raised in a place where the parents and the community taught biases and taught racism and taught, then they're going to bring that onto the job. We've got to make sure that we're raising people in our houses who can become great public servants, whether it's a policeman or a fireman or a school teacher, and see all people the same. That's where it starts.
Very good point. Chief, I had interaction with a Houston police officer earlier this week because I got pulled over for a ticket. No, I'm not asking for a favor.
Actually, I was going to sign you up and give you a verbal warning.
No, and I'll tell you, the officer was professional, but I think disappointed because I think he was looking for Mia. I think he wanted to pull Mia over, and that was.
Trust me,
but
if
it's
that
actually.
officer confused you for me, I need to fire him.
Oh my gosh. Sheriff?
Real quick, I think also we're at a real pivotal point right now where we need to continue to try to transform our criminal justice system. Right here in Harris County, we have a unique opportunity. I've been strongly advocating for bail reform. Bishop, you've been involved in that as well.
When you say reform, what do you mean?
Well, since June 6th, in the Harris County Jail, I've been able to release over 3,200 people since June 6th that would have otherwise been in the county jail, sitting there because they're too poor to bond out. And so that's happening right now, right here.
Let me say, on that point, man, our bail system has been based on economics.
Yes.
If you were poor and could not bond out, you stayed in jail for 6 months to a year till you lost your job, lost your house, lost your apartment, and now you're starting from scratch all over again. That's an unfair, it's a biased system, unconstitutional, by the way, and we want to commend the sheriff and the DA for acting right now, and the chief, to make sure that we implement a system that treats all people the same.
But it needs to be threat-based, not about economics.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks to all of you. Mia?
Yeah, I have Ashton Woods here. He's been wanting to comment as well. Let's talk solutions as far as moving forward with race relations in Houston and our greater community.
So, again, my name is Ashton P. Woods. I'm the founder of Black Lives Matter Houston, and I'm also a student sociologist. So I'm not going to state the obvious, but keep it quick as well. One of the things that I've noticed the fight for the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance brought up, protection of black folk, LGBT folk, just people from all walks of life. I think that the city of Houston needs to come together and build something that allows us to learn from each other, to not discriminate each other, but to understand even if we disagree. Because what I've noticed on the panels today is that there was one woman, there was not black women. I'm gay, there were no gay people there, there were no trans people there. We need to look at how we're taking the microaggressions that we don't know that we're pushing and reverse that, unlearn and relearn some things, and then we can go to the next step. But if we don't understand each other and if we don't know each other, it won't happen.
This is a good starting place, though, for sure. And thank you for joining the conversation. Real quick, I have Dr. James Douglas, president of the NAACP Houston. Talk to us about solutions, sir.
Yeah, and I thought that's what's going to be the purpose of this discussion tonight. We talked about what we do right in Houston. I don't think you can get to the solution until you talk about what we're doing wrong. And until the sheriff raised the bond issue, we haven't raised anything about what's wrong with Houston. You know, we can be the best city as far as diversity is concerned in the world. That doesn't mean we're getting it right. It just means we're getting it better than all the other cities. We haven't talked about the deplorable condition in public education in the city of Houston. So I think if we're going to talk about how to make Houston better, we have to talk about the problems we have with Houston and how to correct those problems.
Of course we do, Dr. Douglas. And I think right now the thing is we are trying to start the conversation. And by inviting people here of all different faiths, all different races, we're learning from them what we should be talking about. What are those things? Yes, and you're right, we are celebrating our diversity, our unity here in Houston, what we're doing right. But it's not until we have these very open conversations in a comfortable setting, too.
But what I'm saying is an open conversation includes what we are doing wrong. And that's what has not occurred tonight.
Right. And sometimes we need those voices from the community to point that out and to let us know what is being done wrong. Because what is so obvious to you, sir, to myself, and to others in certain parts of the community isn't as obvious, obviously, to a lot of other people.
And what I'm saying, to correct the problems in Houston, I have to get people like you to ask me and the other members in the community what you need to do.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Dr. James Douglas with the NAACP here in Houston. We want to thank everyone for your participation, for your open comments. Len, back to you.
All right, Mia, it's been quite a discussion. Thank our panelists and the audience members. Clearly, we need a part 2 with this, and hopefully we all walk away with a better understanding of our neighbors and friends so we can all stand together. This week, the mother of Heather Heyer, the young woman who was killed in Charlottesville, she said, quote, "Find it in your heart to call out injustice when you see it." Finally, we leave you with a look at some of the messages Houstonians have for the people of Charlottesville. Good night.
Part of the healing process is to acknowledge that we do have a racism problem.
I feel like each and every one of us should have a voice.
There's going to be tough conversations.
God bless our nation.
We have a choice, and what we choose will be the history that they will read about.